Today, thanks to this Zen story, we will see why staying close to your children in old age is a mistake. Have you ever dreamed of a peaceful old age, surrounded by the affection of your children and grandchildren? Have you ever thought that living under the same roof, sharing every moment with your family, was the key to a happy and fulfilling life? What if we told you that this idyllic image could hide unexpected pitfalls? What if closeness, instead of strengthening family bonds, could lead to tension, conflict, and the loss of your precious independence? Dear friends, today we want to share with you a story that challenges our deepest beliefs about old age and family. A story that invites us to reflect on the true meaning of filial love and the importance of preserving our autonomy and dignity, even when the years pass and our strength diminishes. And if you stay until the end of the video, you will discover how a courageous woman named Lee defied social conventions and found her way to an authentic and fulfilling old age, far from the golden chains of forced cohabitation. But before continuing, if you are not one of us yet, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications to stay updated when we publish new content for your spiritual growth. The sun, a fiery sphere slowly sinking into the ocean, painted the sky with strokes of orange, pink, and purple, creating a picture of heartbreaking beauty. The Zen temple, perched on the top of a hill, was wrapped in an aura of peace and serenity, a refuge from the chaos of the world. A group of pilgrims, their faces marked by time and life's experiences, had gathered around the venerable monk Hiroto. Their eyes, full of expectation, were fixed on the sage, eager to hear his words. Hiroto, his eyes transmitting an unprecedented sense of inner peace, began to speak in a calm and deep voice. Dear friends, today I want to share with you a reflection on a topic that touches the hearts of many elderly parents, the choice of whether or not to live with their children in old age. Our society often teaches us that closeness to family is the only way to a peaceful old age, but the truth, as often happens, is more complex and nuanced. The monk paused, letting his words settle in the air like cherry petals carried by the wind. I know a woman named Lee, who after the death of her beloved husband chose to go and live with her son Carlos and his family. Lee, a strong and loving woman, had dedicated her life to her family, pouring into them all her affection and dedication. When her husband fell ill, Lee stayed by his side day and night, never complaining, taking care of him with infinite tenderness. She read to him, massaged his tired hands, and spoke to him sweetly, trying to bring a ray of sunshine into his dark days. Hiroto's eyes clouded with sadness as he continued his story. After her husband's death, Lee felt lost and alone. The house, once full of life and love, now seemed empty and silent. Every corner reminded her of her loss. Every object seemed to whisper the name of her beloved. The silence was deafening, broken only by the ticking of the clock and the rustling of leaves in the wind. Carlos, seeing his mother's sadness, proposed that she come and live with him and his family. Lee, eager to fill the void in her life and be close to her grandchildren, accepted with gratitude. At first, everything seemed to be going well. Lee was happy to be useful, to help with the housework, to prepare delicious meals for the family, and to spend time with her beloved grandchildren. The house was full of laughter and life again. The old woman felt part of something again, important again. But as time went by, the initial enthusiasm gave way to a growing feeling of unease. Hiroto paused for a moment, gathering his thoughts. You see, dear friends, living with one's children in old age may seem like a natural choice, dictated by love and the desire for closeness. But often, this choice can lead to unexpected and painful consequences. Allow me to illustrate 7 reasons why this cohabitation can turn out to be a mistake. He raised a finger, beginning his list. The first thing you need to think about is the loss of independence. What initially seems like a gesture of love and mutual support can turn into a slow erosion of autonomy. Lee, accustomed to managing her own home and making her own decisions, found herself having to follow the rules and schedules of another family. Her habits, her rhythms, her little daily pleasures, everything was called into question. Her voice, once authoritative and respected, was lost in the chorus of demands and requests from her children and grandchildren. Gradually, Lee felt like a guest in her own life, a silent shadow that wandered around the house, trying not to disturb. One day, as she was about to prepare her favorite afternoon tea, she heard Marina, Carlo's wife, say, "Mom, the children prefer orange juice. Could you make it for them?" Lee, with a forced smile, put down her cup and headed for the refrigerator. As the pilgrims pondered the monk's words, Hiroto went on to speak of the erosion of identity. Lee, who had always been an active and independent woman, found herself defined primarily by her role as grandmother and domestic help. Her interests, her passions, her dreams all seemed to vanish into thin air. She loved reading, painting, and taking long walks in the park. But now her time was taken up with preparing meals, shopping, and looking after her grandchildren. Her identity, built over a lifetime, was crumbling, replaced by a role that no longer represented her. Lee felt like a bare tree, deprived of its leaves and fruit, unable to recognize herself in the mirror. And so, Hiroto continued. The initial gratitude and joy of being close to her family gave way to a growing sense of frustration and resentment. Lee felt exploited, misunderstood, invisible. Her efforts, her sacrifices, her unconditional love seemed taken for granted. One evening, while the family was gathered at the table, Lee tried to tell a funny anecdote from her youth, but was interrupted by Carlos, who was discussing work. Her voice, suffocated by the fear of creating conflict, turned into a lump in her throat, into a heavy and painful silence. The lack of privacy and personal space is another important aspect that Hiroto spoke about. Lee found herself sharing every space, every moment, every thought with her son's family. Her privacy, once sacred and inviolable, had been violated. She no longer had a corner of her own, a place where she could retreat to read a book, listen to music, or simply be in silence. Her home, once a sanctuary of peace and quiet, had become a crowded, noisy place where she could not find a moment of solitude. Even her bedroom was no longer a private haven, with her grandchildren coming and going as they pleased, leaving toys and clothes strewn across the floor. Differences in values, habits, and lifestyles can create tensions and misunderstandings, continued the monk, introducing another fundamental point for which living with children is not always the right choice. Lee, who grew up in a different era, often clashed with the ideas and behaviors of her children and grandchildren. Her traditions, her values, her way of seeing the world seemed outdated and irrelevant. One day, Lee suggested that her grandchildren play outside instead of watching TV, but they looked at her smugly and continued watching their favorite show. Lee felt like an outsider in her own family, a relic of the past, unable to adapt to the present. Another fundamental aspect to take into consideration is that linked to emotional dependence. Forced cohabitation can create a dangerous emotional dependence. Lee, deprived of her independence and her social network, found herself completely dependent on her children for all her needs, both practical and emotional. She was afraid to go out alone, to take the bus, to go grocery shopping. Her self-esteem, already undermined by the loss of her husband, took a further hit. Over time, she began to feel like a child, unable to take care of herself, a burden to her family. Furthermore, The negative impact on the parent-child relationship was another problem to address. Forced cohabitation, in fact, can put a strain on love and mutual respect, transforming a precious bond into a source of stress and conflict. Lee and Carlos, once united by a deep love, began to see only flaws and shortcomings in each other. Carlos complained that his mother did not contribute enough to the household expenses, while Lee felt hurt by his words. Small misunderstandings turned into arguments, kind words into reproaches. Their relationship, once a lifeline, had become a burden that dragged them down. Hiroto paused, letting the weight of his words settle on the hearts of the pilgrims. Lee's story shows us how living together as an elderly parent with an adult child can become a minefield of conflicting emotions, where love mixes with resentment, gratitude with frustration, and closeness with distance. Choosing to live together, made with the best intentions, can lead to a downward spiral of misunderstanding and suffering. The wise old monk looked at the pilgrims, their thoughtful faces illuminated by the flickering light of the lanterns. Dear friends, old age should not be a time of renunciation and sacrifice. It is a precious time, an opportunity to reap the fruits of a lifetime of experiences and to live in harmony with one's essence. Closeness to one's children is important, but it should not be at the expense of our happiness and freedom. True happiness in old age lies in the balance between love for family and love for oneself. Lee courageously decided to leave her son's house and return to her hometown. There, she rediscovered the joy of living at her own pace. She resumed her morning walks in the park, signed up for a painting class, and began attending a reading group. Her life filled with color and new friendships. Her relationship with Carlos and his family changed, now based on mutual respect and authentic connection. Visits from Carlos and his grandchildren had become occasions of joy and sharing, no longer a source of stress and obligations. Hiroto smiled at all the pilgrims present, his eyes full of compassion. Dear friends, Lee's story teaches us that old age is not a decline, but a new beginning. It is the time to take care of yourself, to cultivate your passions, and to live in harmony with your essence. Closeness to your children is important, but it must not be at the expense of our happiness and our freedom. True happiness in old age lies in the balance between love for family and love for yourself. Silence fell over the group, broken only by the chirping of the crickets and the rustling of the wind through the leaves of the trees. The pilgrims, touched by Hiroto's words, reflected on their lives and the choices they had made or would have to make over the years. Remember, Hiroto continued, that old age is a gift, a time to celebrate the life we have lived and to embrace the wisdom we have acquired. Do not let the expectations of others rob you of your freedom and happiness. Live your old age with dignity, autonomy, and joy, surrounded by the love of your family, but also with the freedom to be yourself. The sun had set, giving way to a starry sky. The pilgrims, enlightened by Hiroto's wisdom, dispersed into the night, taking with them the precious lesson they had learned. Lee's story, a tale of courage and rediscovery, had touched them deeply, reminding them of the importance of living old age with dignity, autonomy, and joy. Hiroto, left alone, looked up at the starry sky. He knew that his words had planted a seed in the hearts of the pilgrims, a seed that, in time, would sprout into a new awareness. Old age, like an autumn garden, can still bloom with vibrant colors, if only one had the courage to embrace one's freedom and live in harmony with one's true nature.